I'm Daisy. Sitting here on my balcony, looking out at the city skyline, I'm reminded of that fateful family dinner. It was a turning point in my life, a moment when the truth finally came out and everything changed. It all started when my mother saw my penthouse on Instagram. Suddenly, after years of being ignored, I was her darling again. She invited me to a family dinner, and I knew it was a setup. But I was ready. I brought a manila envelope with me, filled with the evidence I'd been collecting for years. As I walked into the house, I could feel the tension in the air. The living room was filled with people, my aunts, uncles, cousins, and neighbors. My mother greeted me with a hug and a smile, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was trying to manipulate me just like she always had. Dinner was a blur. I barely tasted the food. My mind was racing with what I was about to do. Then, in the middle of dessert, my mother stood up and started to speak. She talked about how proud she was of me, how I'd built a successful career and bought a beautiful penthouse. But then, she dropped the bombshell. She said that I generously offered to help my sister, Stella, and her husband, Ryan, get back on their feet. I was stunned. I'd never said any such thing. But before I could speak, Stella stood up and started to cry. She told the room about how Ryan had lost his job, how they were behind on their mortgage, and how they were struggling to make ends meet. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath and stood up. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope. I opened it slowly and pulled out 2 sheets of paper. I held them up for everyone to see. For 6 years, I said, my voice steady, I've been sending $1,200 every month to my parents. They told me it was for the mortgage on this house. But according to the public county records, this house has been paid off since March 2019. I handed the first page to my uncle, Henry, who sat nearest to me. He put on his reading glasses and scanned the document. His eyes widened in shock. That's $86,400 over 6 years, I continued. I don't know exactly where every dollar went, but I know it didn't go to this house. The room was dead silent. Everyone was looking at my mother, who had gone pale. She tried to speak, but no words came out. I held up the second page. This is a timeline of all the transfers I've made, along with the actual mortgage status of the house. It's all right here, in black and white. I set the pages on the table and sat down. My Uncle Henry stood up. Is this true, Martha? He asked, his voice cold. My mother's hands were shaking. This is a family matter, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. My cousin Lily spoke up. You invited us here to watch her say yes, she said, her voice filled with anger. You don't get to call it dirty laundry when she says no. 2 of the church neighbors exchanged a glance and quietly picked up their coats. Stella was staring at the timeline, her face pale. Ryan stood up and walked out of the room without a word. My mother sank into her chair, defeated. For the first time in my life, she had no script, no pivot, no tears. She just sat there, looking at the tablecloth, smoothing it with her hands over and over again. But I wasn't done. I reached into my bag one more time and pulled out a folded index card. I unfolded it and read, starting today, the monthly transfers stop. They've already been canceled. I've refinanced the car loan into my name only. Mom, your name is no longer on the title. The payments are my responsibility now. I will not be funding anyone's lifestyle while being called the daughter who abandoned her family. If Stella needs help, I'd suggest she look into the same options I used: scholarships, part-time jobs, and a budget. I looked up from the card and scanned the room. My father, Tom, who had been silent throughout the evening, finally looked up at me. There were tears in his eyes. And then, Uncle Henry cleared his throat. There's something else, he said. 7 years ago, your daddy drove to your graduation. I lent him my truck because his car wouldn't start. He was there in the back row. He saw you walk across that stage. But then your mother called him and told him that Stella had fainted at her engagement party. He left. And I found out later that Stella never fainted. It was a lie to get him out of that auditorium. My father's head dropped. Tears ran down his cheeks. I'm sorry, Daisy, he said, his voice breaking. I should have stayed. I felt a lump in my throat. All these years, I'd thought my father had chosen not to be there. But it was my mother who had kept him away. Stella stood up, her face red with anger. You knew Ryan was arrested for DUI 3 months ago, and you bailed him out without telling me? She said, turning to my mother. My mother tried to defend herself. I was protecting the family, she said. But Uncle Henry wasn't having it. You were protecting an image, he said. There's a difference. The room was in chaos. People were talking over each other, asking questions, expressing shock and anger. I sat there, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in 7 years, the truth was out in the open. After the dinner, things moved quickly. Uncle Henry took my father out for a coffee. My aunts and uncles came up to me and apologized for believing my mother's lies. Stella sat at the table, staring at the timeline, processing what had happened. The next morning, as Marcus and I were loading the car to leave, my father came out. He sat down on the porch step next to me. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I was a coward. I knew about the money, but I never asked where it went. I should have. I looked at him. It's okay, Dad. I'm glad you're here now. He reached over and squeezed my hand. I'll call you on Tuesdays, he said. Just you and me. I nodded. That would be nice. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. It was the same house I'd grown up in, but it felt like a different place. I'd left behind the lies and the manipulation, and I was moving forward with my life. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a small town called Millfield. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. My family lived in a small, 2-story house on Elm Street. My sister, Stella, was 2 years older than me. She was the golden child, the one who always got the attention. She was popular in school, on the cheerleading team, and had a lot of friends. My mother, Martha, doted on her. Every week, she'd post pictures of Stella on social media, bragging about her achievements. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. I worked the night shift at a local convenience store to pay for my textbooks. I got good grades, but my mother never seemed to notice. When I got a full scholarship to college, I ran into the kitchen, waving the letter like a flag. My mother looked up from her phone and said, "That's nice, honey. Can you tell Stella dinner's ready?" I taped my honor roll certificate on the refrigerator, right next to Stella's picture. But by the next morning, it was gone. I found it in the recycling bin. When I asked my mother about it, she said it cluttered the fridge. My father, Tom, was a mechanic. He was a good man, but he was afraid of my mother. He loved us both, but he always took my mother's side to keep the peace. When it was time for my college graduation, I sent my parents an invitation 2 months in advance. I reminded my mother 3 times. She promised she'd be there. But on the day of the graduation, my seat in the front row was empty. My mother texted me later, saying, "Sorry, honey. Stella needed us more. You understand." After graduation, I moved to the city. I rented a tiny studio apartment and took an entry-level job as a data analyst. I worked hard, and over the years, I built up my career. I saved every penny I could, and eventually, I was able to buy my own penthouse. A year after graduation, my mother called me. She said that the mortgage payment had gone up and my father's back was giving out. They might lose the house. I felt sorry for them, so I agreed to send them $1,200 a month. I set up an automatic transfer, and for 6 years, the money went out of my account like clockwork. 3 years ago, my mother called again. She said that my father needed a new car to get to work, and she'd found a good deal on a used SUV. But her credit score wasn't good enough, so she asked me to co-sign the loan. I was hesitant, but I thought about my father struggling to get to work, so I agreed. For the first 2 years, everything was fine. My mother made the payments on time. But then, 6 months ago, I started getting notices from the bank. The car payment was late. I texted my mother, and she said it was just a hiccup. But 2 months later, another notice came. The payment was 19 days late. My friend Marcus, who's a CPA, explained to me that every late payment was hurting my credit score. If my score dropped below a certain threshold, It could trigger a review on my mortgage, the mortgage on my penthouse, the biggest purchase of my life. I started to wonder where all the money I'd been sending was going. Marcus and I sat down and looked at the numbers. He pulled up the public records for the house, and we found out that it had been paid off since 2019. I called my mother and asked her for the exact mortgage balance. She got defensive and tried to change the subject. She mentioned the car loan, using it as a threat. That's when I knew something was wrong. Uncle Henry, my father's older brother, called me a few weeks later. He told me that my mother had been telling the family that I'd cut them off, that I'd refused to help when my father was sick. He also told me that my mother had asked him to lend Stella $15,000, and when he'd mentioned that I was sending money every month, she'd hung up on him. I was furious. I spent the next few weeks organizing all the evidence. I refinanced the car loan into my name, so my mother couldn't use it against me anymore. I printed out my bank statements and the property deed record, and I put them all in a manila envelope. 2 weeks before the dinner, I posted a picture of my penthouse on Instagram. It was a simple photo, with the caption home. But it caught my mother's attention. She messaged me, calling me darling for the first time in years, and inviting me to a family dinner. I knew it was a trap, but I was ready. I was done being the silent victim. I was going to tell the truth no matter what. And so, I went to that dinner with the manila envelope in my bag. And as I stood up in that room, surrounded by my family, I finally found my voice. Now, things have changed. My father and I talk on Tuesdays. The calls are getting longer, and we're starting to build a real relationship. Stella has filed for divorce from Ryan. She's starting therapy, and I'm proud of her for taking the first step. My mother hasn't reached out in a way that feels sincere. Her texts are still full of excuses and justifications. But I'm not waiting for her to apologize. I've set my boundaries, and I'm not going to let her manipulate me anymore. I've learned that strength isn't about enduring pain and suffering. It's about standing up for yourself, even when it's hard. It's about saying no to the people who try to take advantage of you. And it's about finding the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. The empty chair at my graduation used to be a symbol of my pain and disappointment. But now, it's just a reminder of how far I've come. I've built a life for myself, a life that's based on truth and integrity. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me. If you're going through something similar, if you're being taken advantage of by your family, I want you to know that you're not alone. You have the right to set boundaries, to say no, and to demand the respect you deserve. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for standing up for yourself. You are enough, and you deserve to be happy. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe. And if you have your own story of standing up to family, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Take care of yourselves, and remember, your name belongs to you. Nobody else gets to rewrite it.